Democrats raised and spent $1 billion in this election cycle. How much of that went toward some permanent messaging distribution system? How much of that are Democrats going to see in this month, December of an election year, that we can then sit down and do the work in December, and then January of 25, February, March, April, May, all these months where we're not actually running for re-election right now? How much of that money went to building up that distribution system? None of it.
Yo, folks, what's up? Michael Steele here. I'm excited about this. Look, we get to the point where you kind of have these conversations and you really want to explore not just the what happened, but what happens next. And there's been a lot of talk within Democratic circles about where the party goes, who leads it, how it's led, but also some appreciation for exactly what the opposition is and what the opposition is doing. One of those folks who I think has nailed it is my guest today, Brian Tyler Cohen. You guys know him. He's a progressive YouTuber, podcaster. He's been on MSNBC as a contributor. He has over 6 million subscribers across all social media platforms, including a YouTube channel with 2 billion views and counting. This brother's got reach. He's got an audience that he listens to, an audience that has shared with him their sense of where the country is and how our political classes are responding to the needs of the country. His show, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, has become a destination for the top names in politics, from AOC to my colleague Rachel Maddow to President Biden. Yeah, so look, you get those three, you got some juice. I'm honored to have him on my podcast. Tell me, I can't tell you enough how excited I am to have a conversation with Brian. He's the author of the book that we're going to get into because I think it's very, very prescient in a number of ways. Titled Shameless: Republicans' Deliberate Dysfunction and the Battle to Preserve Democracy. It opens up a whole lot of doors and conversations, I think, to better understanding exactly what this opposition is, and more importantly, what it isn't, as you get ready for Trump to take the oath of office in 2025. Brian Tyler Cohen is going to join me here next on the Michael Steele Podcast right after this. Welcome to the Michael Steele Podcast. So I got something special for you to put in your stocking this holiday. It's going to be a new book that's out called Shameless. We've got the author of that book, Brian Tyler Cohen, here with us in the house, as we like to say. And it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you, Brian, to my backyard, baby.
Michael, thanks for having me on, man. I'm excited to do this.
Exactly. It's a great new read. Look, folks, it's kind of funny because when, Brian is known across the country and globally as this, this big progressive, but I in reading the book, I kind of got the small P vibe. I mean, it was not this necessarily, hard left ideological thing. You really wanted to sort of capture the political moment and explain and contextualize what the hell's happening in my party,
Yeah.
which is a bucket of crazy. What did you see out there that got you to the point where you said, you know what, I need to write some of this ish down and sort of help people understand what's the lead up to the 2024 election, the dynamics that were shaping the campaign at the time. What did you see that a lot of folks, progressive, conservative, or otherwise, missed about the election cycle?
It's a great question, and I think in the aftermath of this election, it was largely validated in that there is a massive asymmetry in how people consume content and the media ecosystems that feed people content. And I noticed prior to the election, in the lead up to it that with the right wing, they have a media ecosystem that allows them to not only spread their message, across, basically in a hermetically sealed media bubble, but to kind of craft any message that they want, irrespective of whether it's true or not. And so, when you contrast that with what we have on the left, it really doesn't come close. I mean, we don't have a propaganda arm of the Democratic Party in the same way that the Republicans have Fox and OAN and Newsmax, in the same way that they dominate on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, in the same way that they have Rumble and these podcasts with Megyn Kelly and Ben Shapiro and Dan Bongino and Tucker Carlson. We just don't have anything to compete. And so in an environment where basically messaging is the whole ball game, Republicans have some huge benefit here that Democrats just don't have. And so I was beating the drum about the importance of not only expanding and growing the left of center media ecosystem, but for Democratic politicians to come and foster it, and to come in and enrich it. And now in the aftermath of the election, we're seeing that would have been monumentally helpful to us on the left.
So explain to me, I'd love to get your insight, because I think you're absolutely spot on. The piece in this election that folks did not see, and I'll put my hand up and say to a certain extent, I didn't appreciate the full depth of it. When you go back to the spring of 2024, and Donald Trump basically installs his daughter-in-law as the co-chair, ostensibly the chair of the RNC, to manage the inside game for him. They fired out of the gate 60 staffers who were building the ground game, the organizational infrastructure across the states, particularly in the battleground states, and had laid out this strategy to go forward. Fired them. What we missed and didn't appreciate was the reason they fired them was they put the resources into digital content and digital programming. And they were on the Rogan podcast doing commercials. And every time they go to break, it was another Donald Trump, sort of propaganda narrative that was being spewed. Now, look, Rogan's businessman. It's like, you want to advertise.
Right.
The Dems could have done the same, but no one fully appreciated, to your point, all of those various social media, digital platforms that existed out there in space, seemingly independent of each other. Now we know they're not. They're all connected. They're all interconnected. The messaging is the same. There's the one thing we're really good at on my side of the aisle is when we know the message, everybody says the message, right? So that was the backdrop. Explain to me then, because I take note in your book, one of the things that you really draw the reader into trying to understand is how Republicans have historically, we rely on our history. We talk about all of these things that have happened within the country historically.
It's the historical branding. It's the family values. It's the fiscal responsibility of states' rights, of the Constitution, of law and order. And it doesn't matter if, for the first time in American history, it was the Democrats. It doesn't matter if for the first time in American history, it was Donald Trump who prevented the peaceful transfer of power in stark opposition to what the Constitution says. It doesn't matter that Donald Trump added $7.8 trillion to the debt when Republicans had unified control of government. It doesn't matter that he was, having affairs with porn stars and playmates while his wife was at home with their infant son. All of these people will still rely on that branding to give them cover and to give them a permission structure, basically, to give voters a permission structure to know that it's okay to vote for Republicans because, after all, this is still the party of fiscal responsibility. It's still the party of family values. And so their media ecosystem basically gives them the ability to do that. It doesn't hold them to account for the things that they've actually done. I think something that you said was really caught my attention because, what Republicans are really good at and what Democrats are really bad at is Republicans have basically a 10-year head start on whatever plan they want to enact. So for gerrymandering, for example, this started in 2010, and it took Democrats a decade after this project was enacted in the immediate aftermath of Obama's election in 2008. It took Democrats a decade to even realize what the word gerrymandering meant. And now, of course, we're trying to catch up from behind, but the way that Republicans have been able to gerrymander certain states and continue to gerrymander states. I mean, if you look at North Carolina, those 3 states that Republicans were able to gerrymander are the difference between a Speaker Mike Johnson and a Speaker Hakeem Jeffries in this Congress right here. And so it happened. The same thing is happening with the media, where Democrats have spent all of this time relying on legacy media as our message distribution system. And all the while, Republicans have been building up alternative, independent, new media, whatever you want to call it. But they've been building up these podcasts. They've been building up, their presence on Rumble and on YouTube. They've been building up their other networks that, again, operate as propaganda arms for the Republican Party, whether it's Fox, whether it's OAN, whether it's Newsmax. And all of this time, Democrats just felt complacent enough with the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN that if we have a message, we issue a press release, and then they'll just go out and do the work. And that's not how it works. First of all, that's not how people even consume the majority of their content anymore. And they're not picking up newspapers every morning on their way to the office. It's just not how people consume content. But second of all, the way that content is actually delivered to people is that on the right, it's delivered in such a way that it is wrapped in Republican branding. It is Republican propaganda for all intents and purposes. On the left, when you hand that message over to the Washington Post, they are not delivering it as a propaganda arm of the Democratic Party. And in fact, in a lot of the time, they're actually doing it in such a way that they'll be hostile to the Democratic Party, or that they'll take their cues from the right and say, okay, well, the right says that Hillary Clinton's emails are the biggest national security threat in American history. And so if we're the New York Times, let's run 69 cover stories about how Hillary's emails is the main issue in this election. And so for Democrats not to realize that this is not our distribution system, the only thing worse than Democrats not realizing it is them seeing it now and not changing their tune. And yet that's the world we live in. They continue to insist.
I'm having such wonderful flashbacks listening to you,
because you are reflecting conversations I've had with Democrats in the last couple of cycles about how I would say to some of the former party chairmen, I said, y'all know how I beat your ass in 2010, right? Y'all know what I did in 2010. And you put your finger on it. The gerrymandering piece. So I focused for the first time on state legislative races around the country. Why? Because elections are not just top down, they're bottom up.
Right.
And so if you want to control the Congress, well, who creates the seats in the Congress?
Yeah.
State legislatures do.
But we've never allowed ourselves to recognize what's happening right under our noses. And it takes, again, like a full decade.
The federal judiciary is another one. You wonder why we've talked about the federal courts the way we did for 25, 30, 40, 50 years. We weren't just marching on January just because we like to be out in the cold. It was sending messaging to your point about the branding, and it was reinforcing that branding. Now, look, the good intentions of 25, 30 years ago in terms of creating political parity is very different from what we see happening today. The Tea Party that I encountered in 2009 is 180 degrees away from the MAGA today. Some people would disagree. I was in the room with them. They weren't. I'm just telling you from my experience of working with them. So there's that aspect of it, but the baseline of what you're saying is fundamentally correct. So here's the question then. If what you just said is true, and it is absolutely true, because it is something we as Republicans know about Democrats, there we go. They're on page 7 of the playbook. They're on page 45 of the playbook. We know what's next. Let them play that. We're going to do this asymmetrical thing. Why then does the mainstream media seemingly participate in the way that they do, given the fact that they have been branded as fake news by the very party that they seem to be wanting to play with?
Yeah, see, that's the ultimate question here, is that I view all of this as, look, when you have a president who comes in office with authoritarian leanings, when you have a president who says that he's going to basically fill his cabinet with Justice Department officials who are going to enact his personal retribution tour, you would think that would weaken democracy, and that the mainstream media unto itself, the press, the free press in this country, has a vested interest in being able to protect democracy. But that isn't the top priority. And in a media landscape where where so many people are moving over to independent media, I think that the mainstream media is just clinging on to what they have right in front of them, and what it's really not like a 10-year plan. It's like a 10-day plan, and so why the media doesn't take a stronger position on issues of democracy, why it continues to insist on both sidesing. I think it's a capitulation to a right-wing party that they feel is going to attack them. But what they're not taking into account is that they're being attacked by those Republicans anyway. And so it really doesn't matter what they do to appease the right, because the right is going to call them fake news. The right is going to attack them. The right is going to take their viewership away from them regardless. So I can't explain why they're doing what they're doing, but I can see, the writing on the wall right in front of us.
Well, so that is exactly how I looked at the recent episode, because we are in a reality TV era here where everything is basically an episodic adventure, and everybody kind of watches and participates, at will. But the most recent episode was the pardon of Hunter Biden.
Yeah,
and to listen to my friends on the left, you would think that, oh my God, this was the most heinous, disrespectful, anti-judicial, anti-constitutional thing that could be done. And I heard one person say on our air at MSNBC, one of our guests was like, now, look, they've given Donald Trump permission to go ahead and pardon.
Give me a break. Because Donald Trump needed permission to act in a way that was corrupt. Donald Trump couldn't possibly have done any corrupt action unless there was precedent. He's very careful about making sure that anything he does has to have strongly rooted precedent for his own corruption. Look, I do think that Democrats always feel the need to try and bolster their judicious, independent bona fides by trashing the left, and that is the asymmetry at play. Like, right. If you look at the media more broadly, and especially the mainstream media, it again garners its bona fides by trashing Democrats whenever it can, to show the right, to confer some degree of goodwill to the right and say, look, we can criticize the left just as much as we can criticize the right. But the asymmetry at play is that Republicans don't do that. They get their bona fides also by trashing the Democrats. And so you have the left trashing the Democrats to prove how judicious and independent they are. You have the right trashing the Democrats because they get the game in front of them and they're happy to entrench this asymmetry. And so with enemies with friends like this, who needs enemies?
Right. Hey, so you note in the book a very interesting, the thing about what I love about Shameless is it really is like one of the comments about the book was like, it was a travel log through Brian's kind of political journey. And it really is. It does have that feel where, okay, next to the tour, you need to pay attention to this. And one of the things that you focused on was how Trump was able to work this idea, and Republicans too, this sort of the sloganeering aspect of reinforcing messaging and reinforcing the content they wanted to give. So the goal for Trump was to repeat his slogans so much that they became conventional wisdom. That's a strategy that the right has employed with great success for decades. True. Back in 2004, The Daily Show's Jon Stewart explained conventional wisdom is the agreed upon understanding of an event or person. John Kerry is a flip-flopper. George Bush has sincere heartland values and is stupid. What matters is not that the designation be true, just that it be good upon the media, be agreed upon by the media, so that no further thought has to be put into it. So how does conventional wisdom get arrived at? How do we settle on that? We take the bits and pieces we like, we personalize them and go, oh, that makes me feel real good. That's me. I agree.
I mean, basically, yeah, to some degree. Look, the reason that conspiracy theories stick is that people are looking for a neat explanation for what they see in front of them. And for example, if there's crime, for example, you have a Republican who will come forward and say that the crime is the result of immigrants pouring into the country, even though we know based on analyses and based on reporting that immigrants and foreign-born foreign-born folks who come into this country commit crimes at exponentially lower rates than native-born Americans. But it fits a neat narrative that Republicans will push through. When you add in the fact that Republicans are very good about simple messages, compare that with what Democrats do. Al Franken says that Democrats' bumper stickers always end with continued on next bumper sticker. That's the problem right there. I mean, even as a Democrat myself, I am attracted to politicians who put forward extensive plans. I want to see policy. I want to see plans. I want to see legislation. But the vast majority of Americans aren't going through a 16-page proposal about childcare. They're listening to this guy in Donald Trump, who is charismatic to his base, say, build the wall. And that's a lot easier to understand. That's a lot more concise. That's a lot more attractive for people who are looking for some scapegoat for their own problems. And Republicans have tapped into that in a way that Democrats haven't.
So let me give you a good example of what you're talking about in 2010. In trying to look at the strategy, there were two things that came to me in various conversations. One was inside my own tent with Republican leadership, in which I tried to impress upon them the importance of what Barack Obama was doing and how it was starting to resonate with voters. And there was an inside game strategy that really didn't want to confront that. That's why we have never, to this day, my friend, put up an actual policy that is a counter proposal to Obamacare. Because the politics of Obamacare is richer than the solution of healthcare.
Yeah.
Even though, as I pointed out to folks in the meeting, Obamacare is the heritage healthcare plan, right? From the 1990s. So there was that. The other was the moment that I knew I'd won the narration of the story around Obamacare was the day that Barack Obama himself, standing behind the podium, referred to his own healthcare plan, the Affordable Care Act, as Obamacare.
Yeah.
And when I get my opponent to use my language in describing their stuff,
yeah, he's won.
Touchdown.
Yep.
The second one actually was interesting to your point, was the narrative around the branding. So we come up with the slogan, "Fire Pelosi," right? So a lot went into that. It wasn't just about, let's if you want to take control of the Congress, you've got to fire Pelosi, right? To win the House, right? Meaning I got to elect more Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah.
Well, what we did with the branding on that was we took that concept where those two words became synonymous for every other ill that you had with government. If you want to fix that lamppost, you got to fire Pelosi, meaning you got to change the government.
Well, it's smart, too, because it allows you to supersede people's allegiances with their local Congress people. And that's usually they usually have closer relationships than people's allegiances with statewide officials or even the presidential ticket. Right. And so you might feel like, okay, look, there are always elected officials who are elected in their districts who might be of the opposite party. I mean, Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez is elected in a very conservative district. But if you make it not about her, for example, but make it about Pelosi more broadly and make it about the mission more broadly, then that's going to be able to allow these voters who might be more inclined to vote for a member of Congress of their party to make it about Nancy Pelosi and not these people. Then that allows you to kind of like jump over the hurdle of people who might be more closely aligned with their member of Congress.
How the Democrats could make it about Donald Trump?
Well, in this past election, you mean?
Yeah, not just this past election, but even in 2016. I mean, think about it. I mean, 2016 would have been the time to actually snuff out that flame before it became a roaring fire.
I do. I mean, look, to claim that these elections haven't been about Donald Trump, I think, I don't know how they could be more about Donald Trump here. But
that's
again,
my point. That's my point. Unlike making the election about Pelosi in 2010.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Notice I did not make it about Barack Obama.
Yeah,
I didn't say it.
Well, it's smart because Republicans are always better about finding the most potent villains, and basically the last 20 years, 30 years in Republican politics has been finding people to cast as boogeymen and making them the enemy more broadly, making them the cause of all of the problems that you're facing right now. That has been what Republicans have been historically really good at. I mean, even when it's not just one specific person, even when Hillary Clinton was off the scene, then it became an issue of migrant caravans that were coming in, and every September or October of an election year, it would just be about migrant caravans, and you can't let those people in because they're the reason that you don't have jobs. They're the reason that Americans are on drugs. They're the reason that white people are becoming a minority in this country. So Republicans have been really effective at casting either one person or a group of people as the cause of all of the problems that you're contending with.
So, with that in mind, what were Ryan's like, oh no, what are you about to ask me now? What worked in 2024 for Democrats?
Well, look, I do think that, and you might disagree with me on this, but I don't know that the Democrats actually could have put up a candidate who would have been able to overcome the economic environment that we were contending with. I mean, you know full well that there wasn't a single incumbent in a industrialized country in the entire world who either stayed in office or didn't lose seats in office. And so the U.S. was no different. A lot of times people are just looking to punish those in office for the economic environment right in front of them. There was high inflation. It was a global phenomenon. Leaders across the entire globe were ousted as the result of that. The U.S. was no different. In terms of what the Democrats could do better, could have done better. Look, I actually think that Kamala Harris ran just about the best campaign that she could have run given the barriers that she was contending with. We were talking about a 100-day campaign. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback, but there was not a lot that she could have done. Granted, she could have answered a few questions differently. I think she should have come out and said that there was a broader difference between her and Joe Biden somewhere. I think Joe Biden would have been fine with that, or he should have been fine with that, and should have just said, like, hey, kid, I get it. This is how politics works. Distance yourself from me here, XYZ, and go out and win this election, because it's not about protecting my ego. It's about protecting our agenda. And so that was a misstep, but otherwise, largely, it was a well-run campaign. And I think there was a decent embrace of alternative media. I think Democrats more broadly do have to get much, much, much better at figuring out where they spend their money. You had spoken about this earlier, but look, Democrats raised and spent $1 billion in this election cycle. How much of that went toward some permanent messaging distribution system? How much of that are Democrats going to see in this month, December of an election year, that we can then sit down and do the work in December, and then January of 25, February, March, April, May, all these months where we're not actually running for re-election right now. We're just kind of doing the work that's going to be informing the American people of what's going on, of where Donald Trump is dropping the ball, of what Republicans are doing, of how they're not abiding by the same promises they made during the campaign trail. How much of that money went to building up that distribution system? None of it. It's always just setting $1 billion on fire and then wondering 4 years from now why we're not able to reach our people the same way that Republicans are able to reach their people. I mean, if we had put 10%, 5%, 1% toward building up some permanent infrastructure where we can actually message the rest of the year, think about the dividends that will pay. And yet the fact that we opt not to do that until we recognize the importance of having a permanent independent media infrastructure, until we build up the importance of making sure that Democrats, allies on the outside, are able to continue informing people of what's going on and the virtues of a progressive platform or a Democratic platform. Until we do that, we're just going to continue to wander in the wilderness here.
You hit on a number of, I think, interesting points from my perspective as a sort of a campaign guy and former elected official, having been on a ballot and trying to carry the messaging that you're talking about. It really does raise some interesting points as the party look at transition. I did a piece for MSNBC Daily about the next DNC chairman, understanding the value of a 50-state strategy, which I borrowed from Howard Dean, who was the first chairman to really see the country through that lens. And he was successful and I was successful. So there must be some value to understanding that the middle of the country does exist and that there's something that progressives or traditional Democrats can say to the middle of the country, not just to the East and the West Coast. There's that piece of what you're saying. The other, though, which I think is interesting, is how do you then begin to marry? Because this was my challenge as a newbie chairman, national chairman, and I've been a chairman for state and local, but it's a different game when I now have to account for South Carolina and Washington State, right? Yeah. Two different kinds of Republicans. How do you then find that sweet spot for the rising progressive voices inside the Democratic Party? One, the more traditional, the DLC, Bill Clinton line of Democrats. Two, and the coalitions. Oh my God, you got coalitions for days, right? Within that body. How does a chairman begin to knit those pieces together in light of what we've just witnessed in 2024, where the country has basically said, we're just going to take a quick step to the right for a moment. Yeah, and say we're going to be there permanently, but we're just going to move a little bit more to the right, from New York to Florida, from Virginia to California. That's what we saw. Well, how do you assess that from your listening to your audience, what the work you've done out there, connecting with citizens who are voters? How do you see it?
So I do, and this might be my bias as somebody who works in the media, but I do believe that this is largely a function of the media and our messaging and not so much the policies. Because if you look at Democratic or progressive policies, they win out when they're isolated on the ballot. When you look at abortion rights, they win out, regardless of where you are. I mean, Democrats.
Republican voted in Kansas and Oklahoma,
Kansas, Ohio, Virginia, Alabama. That question was winning out. If you look at the issue of marijuana, that generally wins out. If you look at the issue of right to work, Democrats are on the right side of a lot of these issues, and yet it's our politicians who lose out. And that goes to show that the policies are popular, but the brand isn't. And I to my grave, I will bring this belief that that's largely a function of how people receive their information, and watch as Democrats either get vilified because of the boogeyman phenomenon that we were speaking about earlier, but also because I think Republicans are really good at homing in on certain issues that frame the left as these fringe figures. I mean, you look at, and this is obviously an overused example, but gender reassignment surgeries for trans inmates in prison. And this is, maybe not necessarily so much about the actual issue itself, but it goes to frame Democrats in a light of like, this is who the Democrats are focused on. And look, this issue comes from, I believe, an ACLU questionnaire. I mean, it's an edge case issue, right? But but Republicans were able to pull that one thing, put $250 million behind an ad campaign, and isolate themselves in a right-wing ecosystem that wouldn't push back against it. And so people largely believe there was some polling that shows of swing voters that actually went to Trump in the end. It was because they viewed Kamala Harris as being more focused on fringe issues in society. And that ad is a testament to exactly that. And so that's, I guess, the broad disadvantage of the asymmetry at play in the media right now, is that you can have a right-wing media ecosystem that does that, and that doesn't challenge this notion, even though we all know that Kamala Harris not only didn't make the issue of gender reassignment surgeries in prison among trans inmates an issue in this election, she's actually disavowed it. And this comment didn't even occur in this election cycle. It's from 2019. But they're so effective at taking an issue and just making it the issue of the election, regardless of what the truth about it actually is. And so what you're left with is an election that's largely a referendum on whatever Republicans want to make it a referendum on. And the only way to combat that is if we're able to be able to have some messaging distribution system that can counter what they have on the right, so that instead of playing defense all the time and saying, no, that's not what she's doing, we promise, instead of that, we actually can go on offense and make them answer for a lot of the policies that are that are in fact being presented by Donald Trump that aren't being well received by the American people, or that wouldn't be well received by the American people.
That's a very good point, because the reality on the transgender issue, which I thought was somewhat ironic, was some of the people who were the loudest in regards to that have their own issues, family members who are transgender. I mean, so to be able to compartmentalize off those people in your life about whom you're now talking and disparaging is a unique Republican trait.
Oh yeah.
To be able to have a transgender.
I mean, Michael, you had Dinesh D'Souza come out maybe a week or two ago and trash Joe Biden for issuing a pardon against Hunter. Dinesh D'Souza got a pardon from Donald Trump. Compartmentalization is their superpower.
It's a superpower. It is so true. It is so true. And we use our superpower as well. So unfortunately, the book is Shameless, Republicans' Deliberate Dysfunction and the Battle to Preserve Democracy. Having a lot of fun talking to Brian Tyler Cohen. We're going to take a quick break, Brian. When we come back, we're going to apply the book to some of the top line stories we see today and have a little bit of fun with that. We'll have more with Brian right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the Michael Steele podcast. Having a lot of fun with a new friend. I just feel that really comfortable in this conversation with you, man. I appreciate the fact that we may stand on different sides of the political aisle, but we see the situation the same way. And as much as people, I think, rightly say that they want a properly functioning two-party system, number one, that they want a Republican Party that is about democracy and not authoritarianism and all of that. You have Republicans like myself who look at the Democratic Party and go, dude, can you at least catch up to where the game is being played right now so we can all play this thing the right way? Because that's been, quite honestly, one of the biggest frustrations for those of us who in 2020 made no bones about the fact that I endorsed Joe Biden and supported his candidacy against the illiberal nominee of my party. Did the same again in 2024. But in each of those cycles, Brian, it was frustrating that you still had a number of Democrats out there that didn't get the challenge / danger that was in front of them, and adjusted their strategy accordingly. To the point that you were making before the break on messaging and the use of digital and social media spaces, identifying this generation of voices like your own who have a wide following. I mean, folks talk about Joe Rogan on the right. Well, they should be talking about you on the left. Dude, it's like 6 million plus people tune in to what you have to say. And they're not, I can tell you, they're not all progressives. I know on my network, I hear a lot of people, thinking, oh, well, it's this, all these liberals and these progressives. And then I get, tweets and text messages from these conservatives bitching about something I said. Well, I thought you didn't watch.
Yeah.
How do you know I said what I said this morning if you didn't watch?
Yep.
They do. And that's the core of what your book is saying. And what you're saying here is understand that and adjust your strategy accordingly to capture that person in that moment, to clarify for them what is actually happening. Whether it is the bullshit coming out of Trump's mouth, right? Or it is the leveling up of the menagerie of misfits for cabinet positions, or even on the Democratic side, labeling things what they are correctly so that you know how to engage better in the fight.
Right. 100%. And I do hope that there is some degree of understanding in the aftermath of this election. Like, the only silver lining that I expect to happen here, and that I do hope will happen here, is some acknowledgement from the Democratic Party and Democratic officials that we have to change not just our messaging to more closely align with people, and I'll get to that in just a quick moment, but also the way that we actually reach people, because I feel like, by just focusing on CNN, for example, okay, we have big news, we go on CNN. We have a big juicy interview, we go on CNN, or whatever network it is, right? You are talking to not only a group of people that are largely a smaller piece of the pie in the media ecosystem more broadly. I mean, there's not that many people. There's a shrinking number of people who are consuming legacy media, but you're also talking to people who largely agree with you anyway. And so what's the goal here? Is the goal to bring sand to the beach, or is the goal to actually persuade people? And if you're looking to persuade people, then you have to inherently go find them where they're consuming their news, and not just where you're finding people who are, 99.9% already going to cast their ballot for Democrats and just beating them over the head with a message that they already know. Now, I had alluded just a moment to something that I think that we could change in terms of our messaging. And that is, I do think, and I'm guilty of this too. So we had an entire election cycle where I think that the left was very rightly and justifiably focused on threats to democracy. But I think that the one thing that we didn't take into account is that for a broad swath of Americans out there, when they hear Democrats go on the campaign trail and advocate for the protection of our institutions that they feel have largely failed them, I think that that's why we're not going to resonate with a lot of people in America, people who can't afford a $400 emergency, people who aren't happy in their economic situation, can't afford housing, can't afford groceries. And so when we say, look, Donald Trump is looking to tear down these institutions and we must protect them, these people are thinking like, why? Like, for what? These institutions haven't benefited me. And so look, like I'm in a position where I'm lucky enough to be able to say, like, my main issue in this past election is the defense of democracy. And that's something that I fundamentally believe is core to everything that we do, is the foundation on which we have to, on which we build up our healthcare proposals and our gun safety proposals and our abortion rights proposals and our climate change proposals. And without a functioning democracy, we won't be able to do that. But I think what I missed in this election cycle, and that I'm going to factor in moving forward in my own messaging, is you have to meet people where they are in a figurative sense too, and by defending institutions that they view failed them, that's not going to be resonating with people. That's not going to allow them to relate to you, especially not in an era where they're going to value authenticity and relatability above everything else.
So what's the case that you make? Because on my side of the aisle, and trust me, I stay in the party for a number of reasons. The top one being, is my audience have heard me say, because it pisses every Republican off that I'm still around, that I haven't gone away. Like I said before, have been in meetings in which I've tried to make a case. We need to make a case for why, not just why we are against this policy, why it's a bad policy, but what's our response? What's our alternative solution for those folks? So what is the case then that Democrats need to make, instead of just saying, it's coming off as if they're defending, which in the minds of most voters is indefensible, right? The lack of response by government to my problem, and you're telling me that I should be okay with that? What is the response there? How do you see the messaging or what the messaging should be in the face of that?
I think that we take a page from the Republicans' longstanding playbook and make sure that our boogeymen are the right people that we're focusing on, but to actually focus on them, to focus on greedy corporations, to focus on a lot of these people who have put these American voters in the position that they're in right now. Look, in large part, I think that what our politicians seek to do is tell people making, $50,000 a year that the people making $7.50 are the problem, in an effort to protect those making millions of dollars per year. And so we have these people who we know full well are benefiting overwhelmingly, disproportionately from the system that we're in right now. And that's the people that we should be focusing our ire on. Look, Democrats are the party that's supposed to be stronger on labor. Focus on people who are the greedy corporations who are stealing wages, the people who are not paying workers enough, the people who are making sure that people are working in unsafe conditions. Focus that anger where it should be. And I think when we get to that point, where we're focusing on, greedy corporations, where we're focusing on insurance companies, where we're focusing on pharmaceutical companies who are largely being protected by the Republican Party, then we'll be better off, and we can have we can gain the trust to make that message to people more broadly. But just by defending the amorphous institutions that we defend, those very systems fall into that exact same bucket. And so yeah.
So, all right. So let's have a little fun here. All right. So you're telling me go after the greedy corporations, but if I don't perceive those corporations as being greedy, if I don't think they're greedy, in fact, if I think, oh, crypto, good. I think, I got all these billionaires now who are aligning themselves with my ideology, with my thinking, who are also saying that the government sucks as they sit there with their multi-billion-dollar, $100 billion contracts with the federal government. That piece is not connected to voters. They don't see that side of, or see that necessarily as being a problem, to the extent that they do see that side of it. So if I don't perceive that the very things, people you're talking about, as being bad, you're coming up and telling me that, you want to go after greedy corporations. I'm like, oh, dude, what are you talking about? I like greedy.
And that's, look, if Republicans can make Nancy Pelosi and Hillary Clinton the boogeyman and the cause for all things, all woes in the entire world for decades and decades, and I think the Democrats have a lot easier path in terms of framing people who are greedy and are cause for a lot of the entrenched systems that are hurting Americans. I think if we make that case and we do it over and over again and we put the work in, then that's an easier lift for the left than what the Republicans have been successful in doing on the right.
Well, that's a fair point, because the Hillary Clinton narrative, it did take 30 years to get to the point where even when she became the nominee for president, white women themselves said, no, thank you.
Right. And that's just by virtue of, and that's the result of beating that drum over and over and over. They have done the work, and they were successful by virtue of doing that. And it was put in a way that was simple enough for Republican voters, or even some non-Republican voters, independent voters, Democratic voters. I mean, we're talking about elections where you have to cobble together coalitions. Republicans have been successful in doing that because they are relentless in vilifying people who they think will ultimately advantage them politically to vilify. And I think that if they, again, can do it for somebody like Hillary Clinton, who is not the cause of all things evil in the world, but they've been successful in framing her that way, then Democrats have a lot easier lift at pointing to people who are actually responsible for a lot of this stuff, and building up some goodwill with Americans who are hurting right now and are looking to cast their blame at the right people. And right now we're not giving them the right people to cast their blame at, but I think that we could.
So you get into that a bit in the context of how you in the book Shameless, how you talk about creating equivalencies, and that's a little bit of what we're putting a pin on right now, is creating this space where it's not the whataboutism, because that's a whole different discussion, and that's just a lazy bullshit way to kind of say stuff. But this idea, the Republicans' decision to open an impeachment proceeding, as an example, was without question a desperate attempt to create some mirage of equivalency between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, right? So this idea that, well, our guy was impeached, let's look at this guy here too and impeach his ass, and therefore now you can't talk about that. What you're describing now is that piece of it, but doing it in a way in which, instead of everybody talking about how disconnected and out of touch Democrats are to what's ailing me, what's wrong with me, what's happening in my life, you want to create this equivalency where you have examples to show Republicans and independent voters who tend to lean in that regard from time to time, that these institutions and these individuals are themselves problematic for you, so that you can see now, almost in a way of judging for yourself, which one has the biggest impact on your life.
Correct. And I do think that I do think that in an environment right now where the Democratic brand is so damaged, and I think that, again, I mean, in large part, it was Democrats' defense of these amorphous institutions that led them to lose all of their trust with a broad swath of Americans. I think that the way to kind of claw that back is to take a page from Republicans' playbooks and to make sure that we are focusing on the correct boogeymen here. And again, we can do that in a way that's way more virtuous than what Republicans have sought to do. To your point, I think that they rightly knew that the Republicans rightly knew that it wouldn't be possible to make Donald Trump's hands look clean, but they could make Joe Biden's hands look dirty. And I think that that's what they sought out to do. And so they know who to focus on in terms of undermining trust among Americans. And they did it in large part, with Joe Biden. People, I think, on the right would largely view Joe Biden as severely damaged in the aftermath of his presidency. And that was owed to what the Republicans' tactics were. I mean, there was a 16-month investigation into some purported corruption by Joe Biden that even when you had James Comer leading the oversight committee, they couldn't pull out a single piece of evidence that would prove it. I mean, but it's not about the merits of what he's trying to do. It's about the narrative that he's trying to push. It's about the optics of what he's trying to push. And they've been really effective at doing that. And Democrats need to learn the media environment that we're in right now and how to replicate it in a way that's again virtuous, and it doesn't have to be predicated on lies in the same way that Republicans have done.
That's a perfect opportunity to dive bomb into some of the news headlines that we've seen, and tie that to the arc of this book, Shameless. And what you just said about the way Republicans knew they couldn't clean Donald Trump's hands, but they could make Joe Biden's dirty. And so you now have a situation, for example, with the types of nominees that are being put forward by Donald Trump. You have this situation with Republican senators who are trying to sort of keep their hands clean of these nominees. How do you dirty them?
Well, I think that first of all, I think that's a great question. First of all, I think we spend our political capital carefully. And Democrats have a tendency to wake up in the morning and scream about climate change and healthcare and gun safety and abortion rights and authoritarianism. And basically when everything is a 5-alarm fire, nothing seems like a 5-alarm fire. So I think the number one goal for Democrats is to focus our energy specifically and deliberately. And there are a few people who are going to get in who would have no business being in a presidential cabinet. But I think we have to understand the threat in front of us right now, and to focus our energy on people who truly deserve it. And there's a tranche of people above the rest of these cabinet nominees who I think deserve our attention. And that includes Kash Patel at FBI, and includes Tulsi Gabbard as DNI, and includes someone like RFK Jr. at HHS. And so I think that it would really benefit Democrats to learn how to focus our energy and make sure that we're spending our political capital deliberately and carefully, especially at a time when we're in the minority and we don't have unlimited political capital. And by the way, we know that Donald Trump and Republicans in this cabinet are not immune to political pressure. If they were, then Matt Gaetz would be the next attorney general, and yet he's not. And so we know that it can work. We know that Donald Trump is not dealing with granted, most of them are going to be complete sycophants and doormats for him, but there are some folks in the Republican Senate conference who are willing to speak out against him, and I think that we should recognize that moving forward, and again, pick our battles carefully.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Gaetz was the inside game that McConnell played in making that happen without fingerprints. I say whatever you want about Mitch McConnell. The guy, it's the master at the inside.
No, I don't think you'll find a single Democrat who doesn't at least acknowledge, even, through gritted teeth, how effective he's been as a Senate Majority Leader for the Republican Party.
It's been amazing. So in light of the conversation we were just having a moment ago about the millionaires and billionaires that are out there, What about the Elon Musk factor, who is now the personification of the billionaire class coming to roost, not just behind the scenes, but now on the front lines with this fake Doge committee thing? I'm hearing some Democrats even say, which I'm laughing because I'm like, dude, really? This is the play you want to make when they say, well, we all need to reform the government. There could be some really good things for us to look at. I was like, how did government, right?
As if they're going to go in there and say, let's take 20% off the military budget. I mean, we're going to be in a position where the first thing they're going to go after is like defunding NPR and food stamps. And so the notion that you're going to get Elon Musk to go in there and seek to do anything out of benevolence or seek to do something that's not going to ultimately redound to his own benefit. He's the largest recipient of government. I mean, you want to talk about welfare, government welfare of anybody. What, $15.4 billion to SpaceX? And this is the person who you think is going to be looking out for you and the price of eggs? Give me a break.
And that's just a handful of the contracts he has that go into other areas that he has an interest in. So the storylines are there. So if you really wanted to sort of pull all the pieces together, as you do in your book, how would you define the next part here as we prepare for January 20th, and what will happen on that day? Two things likely will happen. One will be the pardoning of the January 6th insurrectionists, criminals, people who violated the Constitution of the United States will be cleared, and then two, putting in place the framework for the deportation of individuals. I believe fundamentally, if you read Project 2025, is the logical takeaway, regardless of their status. We want to question everyone who has a name that's not Smith or Jones.
Yeah.
What do you see, given the shamelessness of those actions by the incoming administration? What's the counter narrative? What do you say to the American people as a party that's out of power, in the minority, still trying to get its sea legs on the heels of this loss, but at the same time recognizing we got to get our act together quick?
Yeah, I think that it's quite clear. I mean, Donald Trump's own words were that he won this election because of groceries, right? And so he even conceded that high prices that came about as the result of inflation were why he won this election. Is pardoning people who sought to assassinate Nancy Pelosi and hang Mike Pence in order to stop the peaceful transfer of power, is that what they sent him in office to do? Is making sure to deport people from this country who are, by the way, largely responsible for making our economy function and who derive very little benefit, especially compared to what they spend into the system? Is that going to be to anybody's benefit in this country? And the answer is no. But the fact is that we have to focus, I think, moving forward on the fact that while he came into office with what he views as a mandate to help Americans and bring costs down, that's not what his first actions, his top priorities are going to be doing. His top priorities are going to be enacting a retribution tour to benefit himself and also to enact some mass deportation plan that is going to appeal to the farthest fringes of his base and probably have cataclysmic effects on the very economy that he's purporting to want to help. And so the onus is going to be on the Democrats to make sure that we focus on this stuff moving forward. Donald Trump came in because he, was beating this drum about the cost of eggs. Is anything that he's doing going to be helping the very people that he is claiming to want to help, or whose votes he got on the basis of wanting to help? And the answer is going to be no, because none of these things are going to help Americans more broadly. But we've seen this before. He came into office the first time with this populist shtick. And at the end of the day, he didn't pass the infrastructure plan that he said he was going to pass. He didn't pass a middle-class tax cut that he said he was going to pass. He didn't oversee some major jobs boom that he promised would come about. He didn't do any of the things that he said he was going to do. Instead, he passed a tax cut that overwhelmingly benefited millionaires and billionaires. 83% of the benefits were conferred to the top 0.1%. So we've seen this before. And I think now we have a framework for who he's actually going to help when he's in office, based on what he did the first time. Now it's even more egregious. He's got someone like Elon Musk, to your exact point, who is the face of this administration, the richest man in the world. Are you kidding me? This is completely ripe for Democrats to be able to focus on, if we're really going to focus on, okay, who's looking out for you and who's looking out for people like Trump and Musk and the donor class who helped him get into office.
A voice that I think a lot of folks not only are paying attention to, but certainly around some of the halls of Washington should be paying attention to. Brian, it's great, man, to have you on. It was noted in reading some of the background on this book, Shameless. It said, as Republicans in Congress descend to the brink of fistfights with each other on the House floor and the grand old parties become anything but grand, the party that touts itself as standing for family values, fiscal responsibility, and a respect for the Constitution undermines those principles at every turn. You take that on head on in this book. I appreciate it as a Republican because having seen it and witnessed it inside the tent, know the devastation that it has wrought, not just for the party, but for the country. And I appreciate your leveling that up and sort of exposing a lot that I think a lot of people just don't want to deal with, want to ignore, or just outright misunderstand about what's happening in our country politically. So,
Michael, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. We'll get you on my show right away.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Folks, the book is Shameless, Republicans' Deliberate Dysfunction and the Battle to Preserve Democracy. The author is none other than Brian Tyler Cohen, and it was a real treat to have him step in my backyard for a little barbecue and a little bit of fun. Really good conversation, man. I appreciate you and all the best. Have a happy holiday and enjoy, the blessings that come in the new year, my friend.
Thank you, Michael. You too, and happy holidays. Talk to you soon.
All righty. Hey, folks, that does it for our time together for the moment. But you know me, I'll be back because I love a party. I can't avoid it. It's a good time. I'm going to be there. And I hope you're there too. Don't forget to do that thing I love, the download thing. It makes me feel good. Share, like, all that good stuff. Appreciate you guys joining me here on the Bulwark platform. We have a lot of fun. It's growing, and I'm glad we're all growing together. And I thank you for the support. Until next time, be safe, be well, take care, don't misbehave too much. And if you do, come up with a good excuse. All right, you just got to. All right, guys, take care. Until next time.